Hello everyone! Do you want to know if a servant is good enough to spend your hard-earned quartz on? Great! You're in the right place. Welcome to the FGO Gacha Guide. Happy summer, everyone! It is time to tell you about the next servant on Summer Banner number 2 for this year. It is the Leviathan herself, mysterious alter ego Lambda. We will cover all the points that you see on screen, but before we get into those, fun fact with Lambdarillis. Those creatures that accompany her may look like penguins, but they are actually leviathans. And if you don't want to be melted down into XP, you would do well to call them leviathans. In my personal opinion, Lambdarillis is amazing. Her skills are great. She has good stats. She can loop very well. Lambdarillis is possibly the best 4-star unit in the entire game, possibly the best AoE Lancer in the game, even counting 5-star units as well. She is absolutely at the apex of her position. Now let's see why by jumping into stats. She is a 4-star AoE Lancer class servant, meaning she's super effective against archers and weak against sabers. She has 9,261 attack at level 80, pretty average for a 4-star servant in general, while her defense at 80 is 11,749, a little above average for a 4-star servant. Looking at her hidden stats, we see that her NP gain is 0.76%. This is very nicely above average. And her cards have 4 hits on the quick, 2 hits on the arts, 3 hits on the buster, and 5 on the extra. This is pretty underwhelming, a little below average there for the hit counts. Her star weight, or star absorption, how easy it is to get a critical star on her card over another servant's card, is 91. Again, pretty average. Her star creation rate is 12.1%, which is above average, and all in all, that means her stats are coming out to be about above average. Good even. Honestly, her weakest point is probably her lower hit counts on her arts cards, but that's not the hugest deal, and we'll see why a little bit later. Let's jump into the deck in the NP. Her deck will contain 2 arts cards, 2 quick cards, and 1 buster card, a non-standard 2-1-2 deck with an extra quick card over a buster card. Her Noble Phantasm, Blue Summer Palladion. The Summer Dew is like glass. Is an AoE Noble Phantasm arts class that hits 3 times. It will remove all enemies' evasion buffs if you are on a waterside field before dealing damage. It will ignore defense buffs when dealing damage. And it will gain critical stars by 20 to 40 based on your overcharge. This is an okay NP. It's honestly not amazing. It doesn't have any self-damage buffs. Its hit count is lower than we'd like, especially as an arts color, but it does beat out evasion before doing damage. It ignores defense, so it's always going to hit pretty hard, even if you're up against a more defensive-oriented enemy. And it gains a bunch of critical stars, so unlike many other arts loopers out there, Lambdarillis can actually follow up with strong cards. So if the NP doesn't quite kill and you're not on your very first loop, you will be able to usually follow it up with a couple of crits and finish off whatever lived. Next up, we've got her passives. And boy, do we have a lot. We start with Magic Resistance B for 17.5% increased buff resist. Riding C for an increased quick performance of 6%. Independent Action EX for an increased critical damage of 12%. Goddess's Essence C for an increased damage of 200 at a base and further increasing her debuff resistance by 20%. And finally, High Servant A. High Servant A doesn't do anything, it's just there to look pretty. Overall, these are some pretty decent passives. Independent Action is going to find a lot more use on an Arts Servant than it normally would due to the star production of the MP. Riding is not going to be the greatest thing here. We would have loved to see a territory creation spell or passive instead, because that would have helped with looping and with the NP damage, but she does have 2 quick cards, so it's also not terrible. And this is one of the few instances where the magic resistance is decent because she has 2 debuff resist increased passives, giving her a grand total of 37.5%, meaning it might actually do something for once in its miserable existence. Moving on, we've got her skills. Our first skill is Swan Lake, very fitting for a prima ballerina. This simply increases Lambda's arts performance by 10 to 20% for 5 turns. A simple skill, but the strongest point of it is this skill has a 100% uptime duration, because it lasts 5 turns and its cooldown is 4 turns at max level. Not only that, that means you can double up for 1 turn and have a 40% arts buff for 1 turn, since the cooldown is shorter than duration. So you're always going to have that extra 20% arts up no matter what, which is quite powerful. Moving on, we have our second skill, Perfect Fluid. This will give Lambda invincibility for 1 turn, increase her buff removal resistance for 1 turn by 50 to 100%, and finally, grant her the Waterside Battlefield buff for 3 turns. This skill is quite helpful. It is both good defensive and offensive options. With Waterside Battlefield up, it guarantees that her MP will bypass evasion. With buff removal resistance at 100%, she'll keep her buffs so that she can keep her offensive options strong. And finally, with invincibility for 1 turn, you're never unhappy about having a turn where the enemy can't hurt you without the ability to pierce it. Moving on to her final and third skill, Melt Envy. This is a heck of a skill. This will absorb the NP of any allies on the field by 20 to 30%, and then take all of the absorbed MP charge and give it to Lambda. It will also increase critical star absorption for 1 turn by 300 to 500%, and finally increase her attack for 1 turn by 30 to 50%. This is an amazingly good skill. It is finally the all-drain skill that Lambda deserves. Take that useless MP charge off of her worthless support allies and give it all to Lambda. All glory to Lambda. Up to a 60% self-charge, along with a huge 50% attack buff for the turn, it is a massive setup for a big AoE. A fantastic skill. Very powerful, and it's what helps make Lambda so very good at guaranteeing that her looping is going to be both strong and consistent. As you can see by her skills and MP, she does have a lot of power. She always has an arts buff up, she can remove enemies' evasion, she does good damage, she ignores defense, she can charge a lot of MP for herself, she's able to arts loop pretty well despite having a lower hit count on her MP. Her biggest weakness for that looping is that low hit count. It can make it a little hard to reach the loop sometimes, but that's what Melt Envy exists for. All in all, she has all the tools to just always succeed in just about any situation except against Sabers because of the class mismatch. So what materials do we need to level these skills? I have some slightly bad news for you all. Lambda's costs aren't super high, but she has one particular need. All in all, she takes 8 Warhorse Horns, 12 shells, 20 ice crystals, and finally, 8 eggs. Yes, I know, eggs are a very new material, and a lot of recent servants have needed them. It's sad to see that eggs are necessary. Everyone is really upset right now, I'm sure. To max her out, you're going to need 24 Warhorse Horns, 36 shells, 60 ice crystals, and 24 eggs. Again, it's not a terribly high cost, but these eggs, man, every servant feels like they've needed eggs for the past 20 servants. So, how does Lambda stack up against her competition? As an AoE 4-star Lancer, her main competition boils down to Elizabeth Bathory, Artoria Lancer Alter, Finn McCool, Joan d'Arc Alter Santa Lily, Parvati, Neja, and Valkyrie. That's a lot of competition. But when it comes to looping, her only real competition are Parvati and Valkyrie. Finn McCool did get a buff recently, and he can loop a little bit, but he has a slightly harder time with it because he has a lower NP gain than Lambda does. When it comes to damage output, though, I've found Lambda beating out her looping competition in almost any case, except maybe once in a while with Parvati, who can get on par with her. For raw damage output, Lambda's not the highest. She falls short of Artoria Lancer Alter, who is by far the highest single-turn damage. But the usefulness of looping multiple MPs cannot be understated. Despite the fact that Lambda's not pushing the highest damage, thanks to Artoria Lancer doing so much, Lambda is still putting up very respectable and enough to kill just about any wave you're going to find. It pushes Lambda to the top of the 4-star Lancer list in general for usefulness. She's extremely amazing. It's to the point where there are many 5-star Lancers that I think are weaker than Lambda. So, You're definitely going to roll for her after all the talking up I've done. What skill should you prioritize in leveling? Whoops. Well, first off, I would honestly go with her first skill. I know it's not the NP charge, but hear me out. I think it slightly edges the others out. It gives a really good arts bonus. It allows for better looping potential, better MP return on the NP, and the NP damage to be good. Very closely, I would follow it with her third skill. These two pretty much go hand in hand for how good they are. This is pretty self-explanatory. A big NP charge for herself, a big attack boost, even some star absorption for follow-up cards if you need them. It allows her for a very powerful single turn. And finally, her second skill can come last. Its scaling is not the most important. It's not the greatest. Most of the skills on this one don't scale at all. So it's perfectly fine to leave this for the end, and leave it low for quite a while, actually. The buff removal resistance is good in a challenge fight, but not often you're finding challenge fights with AoE enemies, so again, leave that as low as you want for as long as you want. Now, as for craft essences to equip her with, she's an AoE Arts Servant who's amazing at looping, so we'll focus on getting those loops easily. The best free-to-play CE that you can take is Painting Summer, hands down. It gives a 10% arts up, 10% MP generation rate up, and a 50% starting MP gauge, so it's easy to get the first loop off. The second best would be Dive to Blue. It gives a 10% arts up, a 10% MP damage up, and a 50% starting gauge. Dive to Blue makes it slightly harder to loop with compared to Painting Summer, so you'd have to choose accordingly. Painting Summer pretty much guarantees you're going to be able to loop against any class, while Dive to Blue you might have trouble against some of the harder to loop classes like Berserkers or Assassins. And finally, I'm going to suggest the Black Braille only once Caster Artoria comes out. Lambda gains enough MT refund to not need these other CEs in general once Caster Artoria is out, and it will give you a massive 60 or 80% MP damage boost, which actually puts her MP up to the point where it is beating out Lancer Artoria's with any more normal CE. Lancer Artoria Alter, I should say. Now let's talk about what servants to group her with. I think this should be relatively self-explanatory. Oh look, it's Waver, he made the list again. What a surprise, a 50% charge, an attack up, a defense up, a critical up, it's a no-brainer. Waver's always going to be on the list forever. Okay, good job, Waver. Moving on. As an arts servant, currently Tamamo no Mae is the best possible servant you can bring her with. Tamamo brings a 50% arts up for 3 turns, 30% MP damage up for 3 turns to help her damage out with the looping. And she has good MP stuff, but you're not generally going to see that unless you're going into a challenge fight. We're going to focus on looping. Moving on, we have Paracelsus von Hohenheim. He is an amazing friend point level ally to bring that everyone should have available to them. He brings 20% arts up across 3 turns for the whole team, a 50% MP generation rate up for 3 turns to help looping, and can even get his own NP off very easily if you need a tiny extra damage boost. Paracelsus cannot be understated how very good he is right now for helping people out with their looping as long as they're trying to use Arts Servants. Not only that, but as a 3-star, everyone has access to him, which means you don't have to worry about all these other 5-stars I have listed. 2 Paracelsuses can actually do a lot of work for your looping potential, if you want to bring something like that. Moving on, we have Nero Bride. She's another very strong choice as she brings a 30% MP charge, 45% MP generation rate up for 3 turns, and a 40% attack up for 3 turns, so that you can do the big damage. And finally, we're going to end off with the big one. That's right, the #1 arts looper in the game. Coming out next anniversary, Caster Artoria will be by far the most useful ally to bring since she does the jobs of both Paracelsus and Tamamo at the exact same time. 2 servants rolled into 1. She brings a 50% MP charge across her skills. Oh, we'll add Waver in there. She does that job too. 3 servants into 1. 20% attack up for 3 turns, 30% MP generation rate up for 3 turns, 50% arts up for 3 turns, and another 30 to 50% attack up for 3 turns if you pop her NP. Caster Artoria's kind of a bit OP, isn't she? When you put it like that, huh? So quick, too long didn't watch here. Roll for Lambda Rilis. She is incredibly good. She can loop incredibly well. All of her skills are good. She ignores defense and evasion, so she's good against almost any enemy. She does good damage. She has a strong MP self-charge. She only has one real downside, and that's a slightly lower hit count on her MP and cards, but that's hardly a problem when everything else she does is so good, and you can bring stuff to mitigate that. But if you really need another reason to roll for her, it's Melt in a Micro Bikini. Any man of culture should be rolling for her. So let me know your opinions on Lambda, and if you enjoyed this video, follow me on Twitch, join my Discord and all that. Thank you for watching, guys. I will see you next time, and I hope your rolls go well. Good luck, and see you on the next Gacha Guide.